There's always a plan A, and everyone thinks that their plan A is going to work out. But what is my plan B? It's a shame because you do put so much trust into people, and sometimes that can be taken advantage of. I see other men that have done far less than I have, that are out there talking far more about their achievements than I do, and other women in my situation do. So yeah, it's sort of getting out of my comfort zone now and saying, well, maybe I should talk a bit more about this.
No Bullshit Talks is a podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. There's too much bullshit out there, especially when it comes to business. This podcast aims to highlight what's true and what's not in the world of entrepreneurship, bringing you honest and raw conversations about the roller coaster that is entrepreneurship. Each week, my guest will be a high-performing entrepreneur sharing the ups and downs of their journey and helping you prepare for the road ahead, while providing you with actionable insights and absolute gems of knowledge. Stay tuned as I introduce this week's guest. Nicole Bremner is a chartered financial planner, a best-selling author, an investor, and one of the country's most successful property developers. After leaving her career at Goldman Sachs, Nicole embarked on a journey to obtain a more fulfilling way to achieve financial freedom. She now helps to inspire others on their money journey through her book, her podcast, and her financial coaching. I present to you this week's guest, Nicole Bremner. Welcome to this week's episode of No Bullshit Talks, where I have the incredible Nicole Bremner with me today.
Hi, thank you.
And would you like to introduce yourself? Because I feel like you're multifaceted, so I don't want to butcher it. So do you want to tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, for those who don't know you?
Yeah, I do quite a lot actually, and it's hard to, I guess, give me a title of what I do. But I guess for the last decade or so, I've been involved in property and property development. I'm currently doing property number 125, which I only just realized yesterday. So I do that. I also am an angel investor. I've invested in a number of different companies. I also am a chartered financial planner in Australia and currently becoming one in the UK. And I think that's probably about it. Podcast host, author, mum.
Well, we're going to come on to all of those bits, but I think I'd like to just talk about property and investment because, I don't know, for most people, it's kind of the dream. Like people say like, that's the life, invest in property or make sound investments and you're just making money while you sleep, right? So you are literally living a lot of people's dreams. So how did you get into this? Like, how did you find your way and how did you become so successful at it as well?
My goodness, there have been lots of ups and downs. So I will say that I'm not going to hold back. As the title of the podcast says, no BS. And I think that a lot of people go into property thinking that they're going to make huge amounts of money while they sleep. And actually, that's not the case. It is really hard work. And I'm not going to moan about what I do, of course, because I do feel very privileged. But it is really, really hard. And there are a lot of pitfalls that can come along, as I have learned. So how I got into this is I did my first property in 2004, which was just bought a flat and renovated that, and then moved to the US, came back, sold the flat and realized that the flat had doubled in value at that time. And that was partly due to where it was, got very lucky. So that was my first sort of foray into property. Then we came back from the US and I had one baby plus another one on the way. And that flat was just too small. We sold that obviously. And so we looked to buy another house. And I found this derelict vicarage in Hackney. And I fell in love with that property. I walked in the door and just went, oh, I have to have this, I have to have it. And it was derelict, but it was so beautiful. It's much like the club that we're in now with lots of beautiful features. So bought that in 2009 and spent the next couple of years renovating that into what was my dream family home. And it was beautiful. I just sold that in January 2024, actually. So that only just sold, That was very, very difficult to say goodbye to that home because it was my dream. But that's all part of the story. So that was my first foray into property on a bigger scale. And the builder that I met through that process we just got along really, really well. And it was at a time where I had 2 children. I knew I wanted another one, and then another one was born while I was renovating the property. And it was, what can I do? I've worked in banking. I most recently worked at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street in the US, and I felt like I couldn't go back into banking anymore because of the children. And I just didn't want to be one of those mums who was absent and had a nanny bringing up the children. So I was looking at different options. I looked at photography. I looked at food blogging, which you may remember was a big theme back at that time. I looked at crocheting, knitting. I taught crocheting and knitting lessons in New York when I was there. So I looked at so many different things. And it was my partner at the time, my ex-husband, who said to me, why don't you look at property professionally? You've done this house. You've really loved it. You've done our flat. You've done another place for us in Austria. Why don't you look at doing this as a job? And then I started watching Homes Under the Hammer and Grand Designs and thinking, yeah, I can do this. But I really didn't know anything. And so this was now 2011, 12. I found a property in London Fields area. It was probate. It was really run down. I renovated that, bought it for 1.1 million, sold it for 1.8 million and thought, this is really easy. I can just keep doing this. And I did for a little while. And I think in hindsight, and this is probably skipping forward a bit too much, but in hindsight, I got very, very lucky because at that time, Hackney was the best performing borough in the whole of the UK. The house prices over about 15 years went up 900%. So I got very lucky. And I think I probably mistook that luck for skill. So that was my biggest learning, I guess, looking back at my career since that time is over the last 10 years is that, there's luck and there's skill and they should not be mixed up.
That is, we were talking about earlier, we were talking about gambling and a gambler's mindset. That's exactly what every gambler does and thinks they're really skillful at this game. But obviously, you can't take away everything that you've done because you have had continual success at this. So, of course, the market plays into it. Of course, there's different, economic developments, but there's definitely a lot of skill there. A lot of people have come to you for advice and done well out of it themselves. So, what did you learn along the way? And, for example, a lot has changed in the market since then, massively. It's so difficult now. There's so much talk about when's the right time to buy, what's happening with house prices and all this sort of stuff. So, for those who are looking to get into property right now, what would be your advice?
So before I answer that, I will say that not everything I've touched has turned to gold, and not every project has been successful. And as I said, I've done 100, and this is my 125th that I'm doing right now. I actually stopped buying in 2016. So I bought between 2009 and 2016, and then I stopped because at that point in time, the market completely changed. And we had a triple whammy of changes to the way that landlords were taxed. We had the change in stamp duty and where there was the additional rate applied to second homeowners. And then we also had the Brexit referendum. So it completely changed the way that the UK property market was made up. And it wasn't until the COVID in 2021 that people started buying again. And there was all this activity in the market. And I used that opportunity to sell as much as possible in my portfolio. But I will say not everything has turned to gold. There have been some less than successful projects in there. And there's one in particular now that I bought in 2015 that still hasn't increased in value since 2015. So I think to go back to your original question, for people looking to get into property, I guess I've distilled down my advice into an acronym. And I know these are quite cringy, but I was sitting down thinking, what would my advice be to someone coming into property right now? And I think that I've come up with what I call the SAFER system, and it is strategy. Just be really sure of your strategy. And I will say that you've got to make sure all of these things are in place before you even look at purchasing a property, because there are so many minefields. So strategy. What is your strategy? Is it buy to let? Is it my initial strategy, which was develop and sell? Is it HMOs? Is it holiday lets, there are so many different strategies out there. And I think a lot of people just teach one strategy and say, yeah, everyone should be doing lease options, for example. That's not true, because what might work for one person doesn't necessarily work for another because of tax situation, because of their available capital, whatever it might be. So it's strategy. The next is acquisition. And where are you going to acquire? How are you going to acquire? Have you thought about your various areas? So you might be based in London and think, I'm going to buy up north because it's really cheap. But what do you know about property up north? You know nothing. And so many people have come to me and said, I wanted to buy this whole street up north because it was so cheap, and I didn't even look at the properties. I interviewed a lawyer, last week, and she bought 3 houses in a street that she'd never even walked into. And then she got there and thought, I'm too scared to even leave my car. There's a reason why they're selling for £60,000 under auction. So just be really, really clear on your acquisition in your area. The third thing is funding. How are you going to fund it? Debt, have you got the ability to raise a loan? Do you have the ability to put the equity in? Just be really clear on that beforehand, because again, like other people I've spoken to and I've seen along the way, they'll put down a deposit, but they won't have the rest of the money lined up for that completion. And so many people lose their deposits because they believe that they're going to get the money.
Oh my gosh. That's so irresponsible. I'm just like, wait, what? I can't even fathom that. That's, they're like, oh, I could do this. And then suddenly like, oh crap, I can't. And that's terrible. I'm really quite surprised, but
there's someone right now I know who's going through legals on a project and they don't even have the funds to complete the purchase. And you just think, my goodness, this is frightening. So that's the funding. And then the second last is exit. How will you exit this project? And I think this is the hardest one, because there's always a plan A and everyone thinks that their plan A is going to work out. But in my scenario, for example, I prefer to buy, renovate and sell. What happens if I can't sell? What happens if I have to rent? That means I become a landlord. I really don't like being a landlord. I don't like evicting people. I don't like dealing with people. I have too much of a heart to evict parents with children. And I've unfortunately had to do that. And it's the most horrible thing I've had to deal with professionally. So I don't want that. That's not my plan B. So what is my plan B? So you've got to think about all these things and make sure you've got that plan B, plan C, and make sure that it's palatable for you. Because for me, that's not palatable to be a landlord. So that's your exit. And finally, it's repeat. Is this worth repeating? If you do repeat it, how are you going to? What's the structure you're going to use? Do you realize that you have to pay the people that you leave behind if you pass away have to pay inheritance tax if you sell these things? So there's all these different things, and I've summarized it into this safer system. All of these have to be thought about before you even purchase a property, because if you think about that after you've purchased, it's far too late. There's too many things that can go wrong.
It's funny listening to it, because it sounds so crazy that people would jump into this without even thinking about all those things. But then I know how many people jump into running a business without making a business plan. And I spend a lot of my time advising businesses on how to make a plan and going back to it, or even just marketing strategy. They're saying, we want to do this, this and this without a strategy. So I just think people just want to jump in and do, because the doing is the fun part. It's exciting. And people are talking about flipping houses, and it's like, when they see all these, they said, homes under hammer, and it seems fun, but they forget about all the boring stuff, which is actually terrifying and could get you into a lot of trouble, which is crazy thinking about it. But I really like an acronym personally. I personally love it. So I'm going to remember that. That is safer. It's brilliant. But there's a few things in there that I was listening to, and I was thinking about, people who do want to go into this, because I still think that I'm just in a lot of chats, and property always comes up. It's the safest investment and all this nonsense. And like you said, I'm calling it nonsense because I feel like there's nothing so safe about it. And if it was that safe, everyone would be doing it. But I guess the barrier that everyone has is money. And so you talked about funding. And so obviously I would love to know a bit more about that, because, say if people were very serious about this, say if people were just doing it on a whim and, lose their deposits, still think that's crazy. But say if people were very serious about this, what is the funding situation right? Do you need to be already well off to kind of get into property, or like you stumbled into doing it by buying a house, and then, you know, like what sort of your financial situation need to look like to be able to invest in property?
Yeah, well, I've been very open and honest about my situation, and I started with 1.1 million, and plus the capital to invest, so it was a bit more developed. So it was a lot, and that came from a property sale plus savings from working in the US for a couple of years. So my situation, people always say, "Well, look at you. You started off with this money." Yes, I did. I am very open about that. How much do people need? Well, it depends on where they're going to buy, what they're going to do. If they're doing a rent-to-rent, then obviously you don't need much money. You need to be able to demonstrate to a landlord that you are good for the rent and have the agreements in place to sublet it on. And you need to be able to meet those rental payments. So you don't need that much. If you're going to buy a property and renovate and sell it, often you'll need about 30% of that property value to purchase it, plus you'll need a bit extra for all your legals and your stamp duty, and usually you could borrow 100% of your development costs. So let's say you're buying for 100 and developing for 50, you will need, say, £40,000 for the purchase of that property. You might need a little bit extra for the legals and stamp duty, so let's say 50, 60, and you should be able to borrow that whole 50 in that example for the development. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult to find a property that's in those numbers, but it's for illustration. So it does depend. If you're doing a buy-to-let type strategy, again, you can get buy-to-let mortgages for where you borrow 75% of that. So you will need to find that 25%. And again, it depends where you're looking. If you're based up north where properties are cheaper, it won't cost as much. I just bought in Rochester. I've got a 4-bedroom house. It's quite small, but I want that. And it was 600,000. So it's a lot less than buying in London. In London, you'd be lucky to get anything that size for less than you wouldn't get it for less than $1 million. So it depends on where you're going to look. So I think you do need money, and all of this talk that I see about use other people's money and no money down, I call BS on that, because it's just not true. You have to have money to put in. And if you don't, then I'd argue that perhaps you're not acting with scruples, I would say. The other thing I'd say about property is people do view it as really safe, and that's because they know it. Everyone lives in a house or a flat or a property, and so that way they believe that they know about property investing. But we all have a heart, and we don't all know how to operate on a heart if it goes wrong. And what surprises me is that people would never go into a bookshop and buy a book on open heart surgery and think that they could operate the next day after reading it. And yet people will buy a book on property developing and think that they're then qualified to go out and develop a property the next day. And it's not actually true. And it takes a lot of experience and knowledge and a really good team around you to be able to do that property properly, because so much can go wrong.
I totally hear you on that stuff, and it's crazy actually think about it. Yeah, people, you're not going to do medicine and suddenly think that you can be a doctor straight away. But in my industry, people do the same thing. They watch one video on YouTube and they're just like, I'm a marketer now, I can do this. And it's the same sort of thing, and they don't understand it. And it is really frustrating. But you mentioned team, and I really want to touch on that because, again, people think they can just come in, do it themselves and go. But you mentioned earlier as well about having a really good builder. Who are the key players in this in order to make it work? Who do you need as in order to non-negotiable, I need these people in my team to be good at property?
So I would say that one of the first things you should have is a good architect, because a good architect can then introduce you to everyone you need on that team. So I think the architect is the cornerstone. So with my project that I'm doing now, I don't need an architect, because I can pretty much draw up a plan and get something working really well that flows, and I can come up with an interior design package. I worked with the architects, S&M, Office S&M, because I wanted some new ideas, and I wanted something that was completely different. And I wanted their trusted structural engineer and their all the various consultants that come along with that. And if I needed it, they would also help me tender out to a builder and find a builder. Or even if we didn't decide to go down the tender route, they would have contacts that I could tap into. And I haven't done a property for some time, so my contacts have shrunk. So for me, that was the most important thing. And so I would recommend that people find a really good architect. Ask for recommendations from people, and that will be the cornerstone of your team. Also, which is, I guess, a step before you even get to the architect, is have a good broker. And you can go and raise finance on your own, but having a good broker in place will explore the whole of the market, and they'll just think of things that you haven't necessarily thought about. And they'll also put you forward as the very best version of yourself to the lenders. And so I think a good broker, I've got a great broker. I've been working with her for years, a decade now. And she's very good. I know you know a good broker.
Yeah, I do. I'm not exactly, but I'm not exactly unbiased on this one. But yeah, my partner is amazing. I was told that I could never get a mortgage but for ages. I'm self-employed. My income comes from totally different sources, and he was telling me he had to put together a story. That's what they were saying in order to present it. And he was able to land me my dream home too. So I'm very grateful. So obviously, I think he's the best broker.
Yes. Well, there you go. So.
We've got 2 recommendations if you ever need that.
Commercial side, one on the, I'm assuming he does domestic regulated mortgages. Yeah, so that's good. So we've got 2 recommendations. So yeah, get a good broker, get a good architect. And again, I could have done up the plans on my house myself, but every time I got the plans through from my architect, I think, I didn't think about that. And things like having diagonal hallways, I thought, I didn't think about that. That's amazing. So it's been really good working with Office S&M, and I've worked with Amrita Mahindra from Drew Projects many times. She's been great, and there are other really good architects out there. So once you get a good architect, they'll introduce you to their power team, which is great. The other thing is a good builder is really, really hard to find, and I had a really good builder that I really trusted, and it worked very well for 6-7 years, and then things went sour. And it's a shame because you do put so much trust into people, and sometimes that can be taken advantage of. So I've got a friend who's a developer, and he has a rule in his business that he never works with the same builder twice. And that way he always keeps them on their toes. And so he might go back to them, but never consecutively. So he'll never just use the same builder project after project after project. He feels they get complacent. So he'll do a project with one builder. He'll then go out and find another builder for the next one. Then for the third one, he might say, well, I'll go back to builder 1. But he's got this whole, he's got a whole list of builders that he can now work with that he'll dip back into. And I can see that works quite well, because sometimes they can get complacent and it gets a little bit too easy.
Yeah, I guess so, because then you feel like you don't need to earn that role. We've already got it, and I think there's not as much to work for. So that's an interesting concept, and I think like a lot of what you said was also intriguing in terms of, you're saying that. I just think that you really appreciated the work that the architect did, and like you said, you didn't have to have it. But I think that's the same with lots of different things. This is why we hire experts. This is the actual reason. I find it so crazy that you hire an expert and then you question everything they did. And I was like, they're the expert that for a reason. So it actually just saves so much brain power. Everything's better. And I think it comes down to trust and respect, right? And I think that's a key thing for that. So yeah, building out a team, I think, is hard in every aspect, but it's great to hear builder, architect, you said like broker, the kind of key components, which...
And I will say with the architect is that because I've always just trusted my architect on every project's been so different. And it was interesting for this new one, I was thinking, I'm going to go with really muted, natural tones, and it's going to be really calming. And then we thought, actually, I did that when I renovated my partner's boat, or refurbished his boat. I went for those really muted tones. And I thought, actually, this time I want something really different. So Katrina at Office S&M, she's known for her very bright colours. So she's pushed me so far. And I'm having a kitchen that's white. Sorry, not white. There's no white in the whole house. It's yellow, it's blue, it's stainless steel. And I've got 2 worktops. One is yellow terrazzo, and the other is an emerald green. I'm so out of my comfort zone with this house. My kids think it's awful. Katruna's just really pushed me. So I'm really excited to see this, because every project can be different, and that's what's exciting. All 125 of my projects are different, and that's what comes with working with an architect rather than just doing it yourself.
Yeah, because you're limited to what you're probably going to be able to do in terms of that sort of thing. So I love that, and they're pushing you out of your comfort zone and bringing you to new levels. That's really nice. I like that. I guess before we move on to other topics, I wanted to just find out from you in terms of, because you've got such knowledge in the property industry, are there any areas at the moment that you think are worth investing in or like interesting to explore? Because obviously they need to go there and feel it themselves. Like, are there any sort of places that people are talking about at the moment which might be quite good investments out there?
I think it's an interesting time right now, because I can't understand how the property market is holding up given the wider economic conditions. So for me, interest rates are high relative to where they've been over the last decade or so. And I just cannot understand how property prices keep increasing. And I keep thinking that they're going to fall, they're going to fall, and they don't. And I look at property prices every month for a special podcast that I do with a buying consultant, and they just keep going up. I still think that they're going to fall. And I think that if interest rates stay where they are, and if the number of people who need to remortgage is as everyone's saying it is, it can't help but place downward pressure on prices, which I actually think is good. It's good for first-time home buyers. It's good for people who want to downsize and free up some of the larger properties for families who need them. I actually think that our property prices are too high from an affordability perspective. So I think if people are prepared to be patient, and if they are looking to perhaps buy their first home or buy, renovate and sell and provide a better quality property back onto the market, I think that soon, and I keep saying this, property prices have to come down. As far as area, I still think that the best area for you to buy in is the area you know. And it might be where you were brought up, it might be where you went to university, it might be where you live right now. But the very best investment you're going to make is your home, because that's capital gains tax free. Anything else you buy, you have to remember that you're going to be paying capital gains tax on that. And it's just increased this year as well, this tax year. So I can't remember now, what is it, 35% or 30%? Whatever it is, it's high. So it's a lot of money. So I think that you've just got to be really careful. The best property investment is your home. The best area is where you want to live. So, and I think property prices should come down if interest rates stay where they are, or they could increase depending on what happens with inflation and the wider economic market environment. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your
Well, it's funny because my final question was going to be, what do you think was going to happen to the market? So you just answered that, which is great. So because I feel like that's a big question that everyone's asking. No one knows, everyone can predict, and you've obviously given your predictions. But I also find what's interesting is that people would say that property is going to have to crash, they're going to have to come down. But from what I understand, a crash in a property market sense isn't even that big. Like a crash could even be like just 8% or something, right? So it's not going to, suddenly they're just going to all halve in price, which I think people think they are when they hear, oh, a property crash, prices must fall. Like, because lots of people are saying the same thing. They have to fall. They've been rising for this long. But they're still going to be a lot higher than they were, like when you started buying, we said back in 2007 or whatever it was, you said. And, I feel like it's still going to be quite high. So I still think from an affordability perspective, it's still going to be difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are still some areas of London, and I can only speak for London, that have not recovered to their 2016 levels at all. There's a property, as I mentioned, the property I bought in 2015, it's still not at the level I bought it for then, or it's maybe slightly above, but it's flat. So you look at a lot of the places in Battersea where there's just so much, or Nine Elms, that area, there's so much supply there that property it's cheaper than it was many, many years ago. People are in negative equity in their homes in some areas, especially some of the new builds. It's Kensington. South Kent, those sorts of super high luxury areas, some of those areas and some of those properties have not recovered to their 2016 prices. And that's because the whole foreign buyer market was just wiped out. And they're talking about adding additional taxes to foreign buyers as well. So I think that people say, yeah, a crash will only be a little bit and then prices will recover. Prices haven't recovered. And that crash that I'm talking about in some of the super prime properties, that was 25%. That's a big haircut, huge haircut. We had a property for 5.25 million that we ended up selling for 3.2 million. So that is a big haircut on a property. And that's what I'm saying. Not everything I have touched has turned to gold. I've learned so many things throughout my property journey, things that I don't want other people to have to repeat. But this all comes down to area. And the reason that happened is because I bought outside my area. My area was Hackney. I knew Hackney. I knew every street in that little area that I looked at. The moment I went out of my area, I lost money. And so I will not make that same mistake. That's why it's taken me years to buy another property in Kent where I am now, because it's taken me years to know that area and watch the prices and see what happens. So the property I bought was on the market for 720 a year ago, and I bought it for 600. That's a very big drop in prices. So I think that while we might not be seeing a cut in official house prices, if you scratch beneath the surface, a lot of people might be asking $1 million for their properties and selling for $850. And while it's not necessarily a drop because the price might be stable from what it was 5-10 years ago, we're not seeing huge increases. I think there's a bit of manipulation of the numbers going on there to report what people want to report.
Wow, that's really eye-opening, but it also just makes so much sense. It's the same as anything that people specialize in certain subjects for a reason, because you do it over and over again, you get good at that. So then if you suddenly branch out to other, areas, and you're not going to be as good at it, you think you are, but actually it's often not. Same sort of thing with the property, like, as I see, exactly in life, like we should just be applying those sort of things. It's amazing that something so obvious could be like, but it's not so obvious when you're doing it, and you get distracted by shiny things. But it's crazy. I love that, and obviously that you obviously do know your stuff, but you're sort of shying away from property at the moment, which as we've been talking for however long about it, like, you're still clearly passionate about it, you know a lot about it, but you're moving towards more like financial advice now, and I'd love to understand like what's kind of taken that turn and why you've done that. I know that you're a chartered financial planner in Oz, right? But now you're over here, and so what's making you turn into this direction?
Yeah, so it's interesting that I keep trying to leave property, and property keeps bringing me back. And I think I've spent, 12 years, 13 years, 14, 15 years of my life in property. That's a huge chunk of my professional life and my identity. And I love property. And yes, I'm a little bit, probably people accuse me of being a bit negative, but actually I think I'm realistic. And that's because I've been through a downturn. And I think people who haven't been through a downturn, they may be a little more evangelical about property because they haven't experienced the downs yet. And so once they have, then they will perhaps be a little more jaded like me. But to go back to your question, yes, I became a chartered financial planner. I was actually the youngest chartered financial planner in Australia at the time. So I was 22. Thank you. I don't know if I am now. But so I became chartered in Australia and then moved to the UK and never used it. But I've always had a real interest in financial planning, and just the issues that I incurred in my property portfolio made me realize that I was so overinvested in property that I couldn't sleep at night. I was really stressed about it. I didn't have a solid foundation of other assets that I could fall back on. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I know this stuff. I'm a financial advisor, and yet here I am, and my portfolio is so out of balance. So it made me think that I don't want anyone else to go through what I've been through. It has been really, really tough, just being so overinvested in property. There are these other pillars of a balanced portfolio. There's your stocks and shares, there's your cash, there's your fixed income, and there's your property. And all of those things need to be in balance in order for you to sleep at night and not get as grey as I have become over the last few years. So that's when I thought, okay, well, why not become chartered in the UK as well? It won't take that much. I think within a year and a half, I'll be chartered. So I've started down that route. And the whole idea really is just to make sure that people don't go through the same experience as I did, and that people put together a more balanced portfolio and sleep at night. That's really it.
Obviously, like you said, you mentioned all those sorts of things that are going on other than property. And I just think, again, investment is a scary sort of world for a lot of people, which is, I'm guessing, why you've also decided to specialise in helping women mainly. Is you just help women, or is it just, or is it mainly women? Is it?
I like working with women, I do, but I work with men as well, and I've got a few male clients that I work with, so I'm not going to say no men.
How do the men respond to your financial advice? Because I feel like, things have got better, but there's still a lot of misogyny out there. There's a lot of misconceptions that women don't necessarily know much about finance and property, and there's not that many female financial advisors out there compared to men and property experts. So how have you found in terms of respect from men out there?
I think that my projects speak for themselves, and this is something that I struggle with, and I don't make too much of my experience in property. And it was only yesterday that I sat down and worked out I've done 125 properties. How many other people, male or female, have done that many? And perhaps I should speak a little more about that, because I kind of know what I'm talking about. So I think the men that I do work with, they know my background. They've known me for 10 years, and they say, actually, I really need some help with this particular aspect. It might be getting me on board as a financial director on a project basis, or might be helping them with a funding issue that they might have, just coming up with the investment presentation and putting together their investment pack, their spreadsheet, whatever it might be. So it works because they know my background. What I think that we don't do well as women is talk about our successes. And I see other men that have done far less than I have, that are out there talking far more about their achievements than I do, and other women in my situation do. So, yeah, it's sort of getting out of my comfort zone now and saying, well, maybe I should talk a bit more about this.
I guess I wanted to talk to you about, what constitutes financial advice, which sounds like a ridiculous question, but I feel like, what do most people come to you worrying about? What stage are they at in their lives where they're just sort of like, I need advice, I need help with things, and what do you do most of the time to help people?
Sure. Well, there are two aspects where I work with clients. The first is on the property side, and I think think of me there as a financial director or a non-exec director, which is something else that I do for my startups, which we can talk about later. But think of me as a property FD, and I just come in and I help them with a specific project usually. So that's on the property side. On the financial advice coaching side, because I'm not fully qualified here in the UK, I can't give financial advice, but what I can do is I can coach. And actually, this is really interesting because there's what they call the advice gap in the UK and in many countries. And that is that in order to get financial advice from a regulated financial advisor, you need to have a certain amount of wealth. And most people don't actually meet that level of wealth in order to have a financial advisor. And so what it means is there's a whole group of people who may be earning pretty decent money, but they might be in the building phase of their life. And so they can't afford to put aside $20,000 a year in their ISA consecutively over a number of years and be able to have a financial advisor. So that's where coaching comes into it. And I'm a certified financial coach. And what you can do is you can look at budgeting, you can look at asset allocation, you can look at anything that doesn't give specific product advice. And there is a really grey area, and you've got to be very careful not crossing over that line into financial advice. So let's just say you came to me and said, okay, I want to buy my first home, but I'm really struggling to put aside money for that. And actually, I don't know where to put this $20,000 that I've got that I will want to deploy in the next 5 years. What do I do? And so then we look at your mindset around money, which is a really big issue that often a financial advisor won't look at. they are more and more now, but often they won't. Okay, what is your money mindset? Are you a spender? Are you a saver? Why is it that when you have emotional triggers, you go and blow a grand on a handbag? You hypothetically, Sabrina. So we look at the mindset and what might be stopping you from saving. And it is often, there are quite a few emotional triggers there, which is fascinating. And I've been both a spender and saver throughout my life at different times. And I used to have this thing where I used to order Net-a-Porter, I'm sure, while I was asleep. And the next day, Net-a-Porter, the lovely black Net-a-Porter car would arrive at my house and hand over a bag. And I'd go, I can't even remember ordering this. And for me, it was an emotional trigger that I would do that. And so I had to really look at my relationship with money and spending. That was a long time ago, I will add. I'm definitely in control of my spending now. My neighbour used to get it too. And her and I used to be looking out the window going, is it for me or is it for you? And then we'd wave to each other, it's for me this time. Okay. So looking at spending, looking at budgeting, and then looking at, okay, you've got this 20,000. If you need it in the next 5 years, that's a medium-term investment. So let's look at what we can do there. Do you have enough cash so that if something awful were to happen to you, you had enough cash for the next 3 or 6 months to look after yourself? So it's just looking at those sorts of things. And then if you needed specific product advice, referring you on to a regulated financial advisor. But for me, I'm really passionate about working with people who are in that advice gap, who other advisors just don't want to touch because it's not profitable.
The question of the financial gap, because it's actually quite remarkable that it's probably the people who need it the most that don't even get access to it, which is super bizarre. And so from where you're at and the people you're helping, what are the most common things, like pieces of advice that you can give to people in that sort of demographic? Like, I would say the average person, more like than the high net worth individuals who might be doing something different. What sort of the basic things that they could be doing to help save and save for the future at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because when I speak to most women, they just say to me, but saving is so boring. And that's the thing, is that you get that dopamine hit when you get that new handbag or whatever it might be. But as one client said to me, she really regrets having a wardrobe full of handbags and not having any money in the bank. And so my advice mostly is, how can you get that dopamine hit from your investments? Now, for me, I get that dopamine hit when I do my daily tally of how much money I've made that day in my little investment portfolio. So I'll go through my apps, and I've got a few apps that I check, and I go, oh, I've got £18,000 in that account, and I've just made £2.50 today. Oh, what did I spend for £2.50? Yes, that coffee, whatever it might be. I've just made that coffee. So for me, it's about almost gamifying your investments, because I think as women, we don't get that dopamine hit from that. So for me, I just think learn how to and work out ways where you can gamify your investing so that you can get that. You can make saving fun. And I think with interest rates as high as they are now, to levels that they haven't been in about 15 years or so, you can get some really good returns. There are a number of accounts out there offering 5% returns. And that's above inflation actually now, because inflation's come down a bit. So that's really, to me, that's exciting. And I like shopping around and looking at what accounts I can find I found one for 5.2% the other day. So I quickly shifted some money into that. And again, I'm getting my little dopamine hit when I do my tallying each day and go, oh, I made this amount and that. And so it's about gamifying and finding something that you find interesting and exciting. It might be premium bonds, for example. And we're doing this at the beginning of a month, and we know that the premium bonds our prizes are drawn at the beginning of each month. And so for me, that gives me a little flutter of excitement. Oh, how much am I going to win this month? One day it's going to be the million. So it is about gamifying it and finding something that gives you that dopamine hit and makes that saving and that going without spending worthwhile for you. And I think that's probably the advice that we have to tackle for 90% of people that I speak to.
Yeah, you mentioned 5.2%. I was thinking, I wonder why that is, because I do the same. I'm definitely a gamification person. I also do find saving boring and shopping so much more. But yeah, I feel like finding accounts that have a bigger percentage is also almost like a win. You feel like, oh, and actually I earned that much money by doing absolutely nothing. And it's quite nice when you think about it. And you can even think, like, for example, I had one account and it's matured. It's maturing in November. I'm using that for my honeymoon fund, and it's literally paying for my entire honeymoon.
Yeah.
Which is nuts when you think about it. And I'm like, I've just got a free honeymoon from just deciding to be a bit more sensible. That's a win.
Exactly.
A win.
Exactly.
But I wanted to ask you, what is your opinion on, for example, like Martin Lewis's site? Because I feel like a lot of people use it. And do you think it's good? Do you think people should be on there? What do you think of the advice given on there?
Wow. So Martin Lewis is amazing, what he has achieved and the way that he's got people thinking about money and money saving. So remember, he's the money saving expert. And I think that what he does is very much minding the pennies, and which I think is great. And you can get a lot of really good resources there. And sometimes when I Google various things, money saving expert comes up. So I do think it's worth looking at. I think once you get to a certain level of savings, though, you're thinking a bit bigger, and so you need to look a bit bigger. And that's why what I do is not necessarily about budgeting and saying, look, you can save £10 if you do this. It's more about, okay, let's think a bit bigger than this. How can you put money aside so that you can get a free honeymoon from the interest or the return that you've generated in this portfolio? So it's a little bit bigger than that. And so it definitely has a place, and he's a guru. He's amazing.
He's a great resource, I think, a lot of people. So I think it's nice to hear that from someone who's actually in this business too. So I think I might browse them more, because the last one I think I like is like ISA comparisons on brand accounts. They're quite good because it's all in one place and you can send them out and see. So I do think those are good. And yes, obviously there's other little ones, but there are some bigger things in there which are nice. But I wanted to talk about the other strings your bow, which is investment in general as well. So I talked at the beginning that many people want to get into investment and property. And investment, you're now an angel investor. And this is fascinating for so many reasons. Obviously, startup culture's even bigger now. But how did you get involved in angel investment? What made you switch? And what do people do if they want to do it? Because I feel like people have a bit of money here and there. And angel investment, you don't need a lot, do you? People who invest in like £5,000-10,000 I've seen in businesses, and a lot of people do have that as a disposable funds to be able to invest. Like, what would be your recommendation there? I guess we'll hear how you started and what you would recommend, really.
Yeah, I did it by accident, and it really was an accident, my very first investment, and I didn't even think of it as an angel investing, really. But so I've done 4 angel investing or purchasing of companies, and I've got a 5th that I'm working on at the moment. So my very first one was quite a large check into a property auction company, and it's Bamboo Auctions, and it's been a great company that really, thankfully, took advantage, didn't take advantage, but it benefited from COVID lockdown because no one could go to auctions live anymore, so they all went online. So it is one of the larger players in the online auction market, and it's run by a fantastic guy, Robin. And I will say I always invest in people, and I know a lot of people say this when they're talking about it, but for me, it's all about people. And when I look at the 2 that have not done so well, or have failed actually, I got the people side wrong. So that was the first one, was Bamboo Auctions. The second one it's called Terrible Group. And it's not as the name suggests. So they started life as a music merchandise company, and they've now grown and evolved, and they will do everything to do with a band touring. So complete tour management, complete merchandise management, from their online retail through to the in-person sales at various events. They're, again, run by 2 fantastic people who I bought into. And Tertia, the co-founder, she contacted me on Instagram and said, can we talk? I'm a female-led business, and I really like what you're doing, and I think that you could add value to our company, and also you can invest in us. So that was that was really exciting. And it was really interesting for me to look at something that was completely different to the property market. And they're doing a great job, and that's doing well. I then invested in a bathroom startup, which I thought would be fantastic, because when you go to buy a bathroom, you've got to go to about 10 different places to get everything that you need. And the solution was that you design your bathroom, and then everything gets delivered on one pallet. I thought, fantastic. It didn't work for many reasons, unfortunately. So I lost my money in that one. And then the other one, I lost my money down to me. So I bought a company called Morel, which was a women's fitness wear company. And I bought that whole company for around £6,000, which is, as you say, for a relatively small amount, you can buy companies. This company was great, 15,000 followers on Instagram, £20,000 worth of stock, mailing list, everything. And my idea was to branch out into the women's fitness wear industry. And then my life turned upside down. This was in 2018. I went through a really tough time in my property portfolio. My marriage broke down. Everything happened. So unfortunately, I was just not able to put the time into that. And it's still there. I've rebranded it as EATER, which is Eat, Drink, Exercise, Repeat. I'd love one day to come up with some idea to take that forward, because I still think it's a really good brand. The branding is brilliant. I think the concept could be interesting. It doesn't have to be athletic wear for women or athleisure wear for women. It can be so much more than that. So one day I'll do something with that. And then I'm looking at something right now in the financial investment space, the financial coaching, the empowering women with investing. I'm looking at something quite seriously. I've got term sheet and things like that I just need to sign and get over. And that's very exciting, because that's an area that I'm very passionate about. And I'm looking forward to joining their advisory board. So that's what I've done. How other people can get involved is join women's networking groups, or it doesn't have to be women's networking. Join networking groups. And if you've got a bit of spare cash, say to people, I'm looking to invest in companies. And you will be inundated. Put it on LinkedIn that you're an investor. I get so many messages a day. I've had to just close my LinkedIn pretty much, because I get too many messages. Some of them are interesting, some of them are really not, but you will have so many inbound requests. And it is interesting, but there are businesses for sale, existing businesses that you can buy, and there are many, many brokers online that offer those. Someone I know just bought an online drinks company where you get cocktail delivered through your post. So there's all these, and she's all excited about turning that company around. I did kick the tires on another couple of finance companies that I found through online brokers, and none of them came to anything, but it's just interesting to look at those. So when you're looking at them, have some really hard boundaries about what you will and won't invest in. Make sure it's an industry that you know. So for me, I thought I knew bathrooms, being a property developer, but I didn't know the other nuances of that industry. Terrible group. I knew nothing about music merchandise, but I really trusted the founders. Another thing I would say is never invest, and this is just my opinion, never invest in someone who wants to raise money to pay themselves. I got a pitch through the other day, and I spent an hour and a half on this call that I'll never get back again, with these people pitching me. And then they were saying, yeah, and we're going to pay ourselves £5,000 a month each. So that's £10,000 a month that's gone already before you even do anything. I went, no, that's not how it works. That's not what I'm going to invest my money in. For me, I loved Robin at Bamboo and Tertia and Jack at Terrible, because both of them were on a shoestring, and both of them they really did bootstrap their companies for the first few years. And to me, that's what it's about. You should be prepared to really work hard and not take investor money to pay yourself initially. That should be your own contribution into that. So you should still pay yourself. Otherwise, it's just a hobby, but that should come later on.
Yeah, I think that's a really refreshing thing to hear from an investor, because I've seen so many people waste money, and I've seen so many founders who just throw away startups, and they work so hard to get funding, only just blow all the money. I mean, I remember being in a WeWork office for about 3 years, and I was in my office. I was next to a company that just received 25 million in funding, and they suddenly opened up. They took all the offices around. One was for a golf course, so they had a mini golf course. The one next to me was for a PlayStation, and oh my god, all they did was play FIFA in there all the time. And then another one was like a studio, which I never really used, and people used to go in there and nap. And like, I was like, what is? And I don't know how much this cost.
Yes.
Like, it was. They had basically about 30 grand of office space. Like, one of them had just turned into a meeting room, and it was the most like inefficient use of lunch ever. And one of the guys was just like, I'm just going to go stay 6 months in like the Maldives, and I think what I'm going to spend the money on. And I'm like, how are the investors okay with this? And I just think that all startups are like this because it was so irresponsible. But it's so nice to hear that that's not what people now. Yeah, people don't actually look at it, because I think that people have forgotten the hustle in startup life, because hustle has now got a negative connotation to it. And I don't think it needs to. I think there's obviously hustling to burnout, which is not healthy, but hustling to actually get stuff done because you believe in the brand and you care for it and working hard at it. I think it's admirable.
Absolutely. And I would not invest in a company where there wasn't hustle. And while I don't want to hustle, I've been there, done that. I want the people that I'm investing in to hustle, and I want them to work hard, and I want to see that my money is being put to good use. The other thing I look for, though, is cash flow. I want to see positive cash flow coming through. I don't invest at idea stage where there is no revenue yet. There has to be revenue. And the one that I'm investing in now, they've got really solid revenue. And they don't have profits because they're reinvesting everything back into the company. That's fine. Don't need to see profits yet, but I need to see that really strong revenue. So some people might say, well, that's not actually seed. That's more the next round.
Yeah.
It depends on how you look at it. But for me, I want to see strong revenues already.
So I feel like I've got so much great advice from this conversation, which is amazing. So I want to know a bit more about your book, because you've actually written a lot of this in a book already, and I want to know what's more to come as well, because I'm pretty sure like you've got so much more to give, and what are other books on the horizon. So tell me a little bit about what you've got out at the moment, what you've got planned.
Sure. Well, I put up on Instagram yesterday that I realised I'd built 125 or renovated 125 properties, and someone said, you should write a book. Funny that, I have. So in 2016, I published Bricking It, From Stay-at-Home Mum to Millions in Property. And now I look back at it and I cringe. I really do, which is not great. But I look back at it and think, oh my goodness, it was such a naive book. When I read it, when I read through all of it, it just feels really naive, because I'd never experienced a downturn. I hadn't experienced a tough time in my property portfolio. And sure, I'd had hard times in my life, but never anything like what I experienced after that event. So what I wanted to do was almost set the record straight and say, right, that was of an era. That was naive. That was the evangelical person without the battle scars talking. Now let's set the record straight. So I've just finished writing my second book, and it's called Bricked It. And I wanted it to be called How to Lose Millions in Property, but my editor said no, how, brackets, not to lose millions in property. So it's kind of the story from 2016 onwards, and the lessons that I've learned from nearly losing everything, because spoiler alert, I nearly lost everything that I'd built up. And I built up quite a big portfolio at one point, and I nearly lost everything. And that's why I have the grey hair and the wrinkles that I do. So for me, it's making sure that no one ever has to go through that, and just showing people this safer system that I've come up with, and why you must adhere to that if you want to build a really solid property portfolio. And it goes through a little bit of my experience as well of what I went through. So that's book number 2. I'm sure there's another book in me too, because I've absolutely loved writing that. I've really enjoyed the process.
So I'll put links to the books in the show notes, and for people to be able to read those. But where can people get in touch with you if they want to ask questions? Because you've had so much great advice. And where's the best place that people can get you?
Probably Instagram. I'm most active there. So at NS Bremner, Bremner, or I've got my website, NicoleBremner.com, and occasionally I'll go on LinkedIn. I need to do more LinkedIn, but Instagram's the main one.
Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been amazing, and I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. So have I.